China and North Korea are in more danger in the Pacific than ever before. And along with them, Vladimir Putin, mired in the Ukrainian quagmire, is anxiously watching his weak spot in the Pacific, his fleet and bases in the Far East. Why, you might ask? Because now, the United States is deploying all its power in the Pacific. This is not a drill, it is not a bluff, it is a rewriting of the rules of the game. Missiles have been launched. Strategic bombers have taken off from the runway. Silent killers, nuclear submarines, have plunged into the darkest depths, and aircraft carriers have confidently taken their positions. The evidence we will show you today is not ordinary military activity. This is the first time in decades that the US has projected its power so openly, so coordinated, and so deadly. We're talking about the story of a single SM-6 missile fired from the Australian coast, B-2 stealth bombers landing in Guam, and Virginia-class submarines patrolling beneath the waves. The balance of power has now shifted completely, and at the heart of this new power is a three-layered encirclement formed by American weapons, land, air, and sea. Every missile, every bomber, and every warship puts a little more pressure on China, Russia, and North Korea. So how did the US become such a dominant force in the Pacific in such a short time, and why did this Far East group go into panic mode? The answer is simple. This balance shifted through a deliberate, clearly visible, yet extremely calculated series of actions that demonstrated real hardware, real personnel, and real political will. This scenario shows how Vladimir Putin weakened his Far East flank by focusing on Ukraine, and how China, his ally, trapped itself because of its Taiwan ambitions. It all started with US activities in Australia. And this first step is the most critical one for understanding how the balance shifted. For the first time in its history, the US military fired an SM-6 missile from its new Typhon missile system outside its own territory, in an allied country, Australia. The SM-6 missile destroyed a naval target in the Pacific in just a few seconds. However, the real damage was strategic, not military. This launch was not a simple military test. It was a clear message that resonated across a wide geography, from China's coastal security to Russia's Pacific Fleet to North Korea's closed missile bases. So why is this missile launch so important? Because Typhon is not an ordinary missile launcher. It is a game changer. Typhon is a modern platform with multiple missile capabilities, focused on high mobility and equipped with integrated satellite targeting systems. On paper, it is mounted on a truck chassis, longer than a classic HIMARS launcher, but what makes it deadly is what's inside. Typhon is a hybrid system capable of using two different missiles. The first is the SM-6. This is the land-based version of the air defense missile Raytheon has been using on its Aegis destroyers for years, but with one difference. It can now hit not only aircraft but also naval targets. Its range is stated as 370 kilometers, but test records show it can extend up to 460 kilometers. It's also important to note its Mach 3.5 speed and its ability to maneuver at up to 50 Gs in the final seconds. It is designed to strike hypersonic threats, such as China's DF-17 or Russia's Iskander, the moment they enter the target area. Second, and the real nightmare, is the Tomahawk UGM-109E Block 4. Same truck, same ramp, this time carrying a cruise missile with a range of 1,600 kilometers. This is the move that completely changes the chessboard. Now, let's look at the location in Australia again. The Canberra government has opened the training area near Darwin Port and Tyndall Air Base on the northern coast for these tests. Do you know what this means? This decision means that Tomahawk missiles with a range of 1,600 kilometers can now directly target China's most strategic points on its southern coast, particularly the Yulin naval base on Hainan Island and the regional supply port of Zhangjiang. China's most valuable submarines and aircraft carriers are now under threat from a land-based missile. The fact that the US tested such a weapon in a continent-sized country like Australia, relatively close to China, shows that it has moved from a defense concept to a preemptive deterrence strategy. This is the clearest way of saying, if you take a step, this will be my response. What the Pentagon demonstrated in this test was not just the performance of its firepower. What it demonstrated was how deep alliance networks can go. Australia's hosting of this test shows that it has aligned its infrastructure and political resolve with the US. This is what China and Russia fear most. In other words, a united front. But this is not just a nightmare for China. It is also a disaster scenario for Vladimir Putin. While Putin is consuming all his military resources, his best soldiers, and his missiles in Ukraine, Russia's vast territories in the Far East are left almost defenseless. Russia's main naval base in the Pacific, Vladivostok, is becoming the primary target for this new Typhon system. If the US were to deploy this Typhon system, not to Australia but to northern Japan or South Korea, which is now technically feasible, 1,600-kilometer Tomahawk missiles could sink the entire Russian Pacific Fleet in Vladivostok harbor. While Putin tries to wage war in the West, he is unable to protect his most strategic assets in the East. Typhon exposes this weakness of Putin's. This is painful proof for the Russian people, showing how their leaders have left the homeland defenseless because of their imperial ambitions. The fact that this system is deployed in Australia is a direct challenge not only to China, but also to any authoritarian power seeking to exert influence in the Indo-Pacific basin. If you think that the SM-6 firing of Typhon missiles is the only factor China, Russia, and North Korea need to contend with, you are mistaken. This was only the first layer of the encirclement. The second layer is in the sky, namely Guam. It may look like an ordinary island geographically, but the massive concrete runways and military hangars rising above it make it one of the world's most strategic military points. Guam is the US's unsinkable aircraft carrier in the Pacific. Now, when you station two giant strategic bombers like the B-52 Stratofortress and the B-2 Spirit on this island, it ceases to be just a base. It becomes the launch point for a strategic message. In July 2025, the U.S. Air Force redeployed these two platforms to Guam. This deployment is not targeting regional hotspots like Iran. These aircraft have shifted their focus directly toward the China, Russia, and North Korea axis. These three countries have been attempting to form a bloc against the U.S., not only militarily, but also politically and ideologically in recent years. That is precisely why the presence of B-52s in Guam is so significant. The B-52H may be the oldest aircraft in the American inventory. You could call it my grandfather's bomber, but that would be a big mistake, because the interior of that old fuselage was completely updated in the 2020s. It has a new AN/APG-79 AESA radar and Link 16 tactical data link, but most importantly, the weapons it carries. We are talking about the AGM-158BJ ASSM-ER. These are long-range, radar-evading cruise missiles. A B-52 can carry a total of 19 JASSM-ER missiles under its wings and inside its fuselage. Let's do some simple math. 6 aircraft stationed in Guam can launch 114 JASSM-ER missiles in a single sortie. This sortie count is more than enough to target all of China's main radar installations in the East Sea Fleet at once. This is enough to wipe North Korea's entire command and control centers off the map. And yes, this is enough to destroy the Russian Pacific Fleet, weakened by Ukraine, without firing a single shot in Vladivostok. What about the B-2 Spirit? This is the psychological aspect. The B-2 is invisible on radar. It is the weapon of the first night, meaning it is designed to penetrate the enemy's air defenses in the first minutes of war and strike the most heavily protected targets. B-2s carry massive bunker-busting bombs called GBU-57 ABMOPS. So what does this mean? It means that North Korean leader Kim Jong-un's underground bunkers in Pyongyang are no longer safe, and that China's most secret missile silos are also targets. It should also be noted that this situation will become a test of how effective Putin's much-touted S-400 and S-500 air defense systems are against the B-2. The reputation of the invincible air defense systems Putin sells to his allies is shaken a little more with every B-2 flight. This threatens not only Putin's prestige, but also his billion-dollar arms contracts. There is also a psychological cost to this deployment in Guam. China, Russia, and North Korea are forced to run their radars at full capacity 24/7, while these aircraft are in Guam. This leads to radar fatigue, inflates maintenance budgets, and wears down the systems. The moment the B-2 takes off, air defense centers in Beijing, Pyongyang, and Vladivostok are forced to work full staff throughout the night, simply because of the possibility. This is less a military exercise and more a simultaneous reminder to all three countries. Your airspace boundaries no longer protect you. The first layer of the encirclement was on land, the Typhon missiles in Australia. The second layer was in the air, the B-52s and B-2s in Guam. But the third and perhaps most deadly layer is underwater, the giant fleet. Underwater operations are quieter, but their consequences are more lasting. Virginia-class nuclear attack submarines like the USS Toledo are the sharpest points of deterrence. One of the most notable deployments by the U.S. Navy recently was the Pacific Fleet's decision to send these advanced attack submarines to the Western Pacific around Hawaii and Guam. This move did not cause a major sensation among the public. This is because these weapons are inherently silent, but in military circles, it created a seismic wave effect. So, apart from the silence of a Virginia-class submarine, what are the other reasons why it is the nightmare of China and Russia? The first reason is the power source. These submarines are nuclear-powered. This means that submarines can operate for 25 years without refueling. These beasts have unlimited range and unlimited mission duration. A Virginia-class submarine can go to the Chinese coast and wait silently for months. The second reason these submarines affect China and Russia is their weapon load. The newest versions of these submarines, known as Block V, feature an additional hull segment called the Virginia Payload Module. This allows them to carry 40% more cruise missiles than previous versions. The USS Toledo, USS New Hampshire, and USS Missouri, which are on patrol in the Hawaii-Guam line, each carry more than 40 Tomahawk cruise missiles. These missiles can reach many strategic targets, from China's naval facilities on Hainan Island to North Korea's nuclear facilities on the Sinpo coast. The third reason is their mission profile. These submarines are not just for sinking ships. They are hunter-killer platforms. They are designed to secretly infiltrate Navy SEALs onto enemy shores and to eavesdrop on or cut enemy communication cables. And most importantly, these submarines undertake the mission of finding and destroying enemy submarines. Now let's apply this massive fleet to the situation in the Pacific first. Let's talk about China. Beijing boasts about the size of its navy. The plan now has more ships than the US. They are deploying to the Pacific with the Shandong and Fujian aircraft carriers. But a single Virginia-class submarine can track that entire massive aircraft carrier group for weeks, undetected, and in a crisis, send them all to the bottom of the ocean. China's entire naval strategy is paralyzed under this invisible threat. The situation is no different for North Korea. Pyongyang's biggest strategic asset is its submarine-launched ballistic missiles. The primary mission of Virginia-class submarines is to tail those Korean submarines the moment they leave port in Sinpo, and, if a war order comes, destroy them before those missiles can be fired. This is a move that fundamentally undermines Kim Jong-un's nuclear blackmail. And for Vladimir Putin, we need to deploy the US's massive navy. Russia's pride is its nuclear submarine fleet. But Putin has been so weakened by the war in Ukraine that he does not have modern submarine defense aircraft or ships to protect the Pacific Fleet. The entry of a U.S. Virginia-class submarine into the Sea of Okhotsk, known as Russia's sacred fortress, or its waiting at the entrance to the port of Vladivostok, shows just how fragile even Putin's nuclear deterrence is. This silent presence is Putin's worst nightmare. I can strike anytime, anywhere. But as long as I remain silent, you will never know where I am. These sentences probably best summarize the situation. So far, we have discussed the US's three-layered encirclement. So what are the other side, namely Beijing, Moscow, and Pyongyang, doing about this? Their responses reveal their panic and strategic failure. Washington's aggressive moves were met with fierce resistance in Beijing. The first concrete countermeasure came in July 2025. Two Chinese aircraft carriers, Shandong and Fujian, were deployed simultaneously in the Western Pacific for the first time. This was a strategic response to the capabilities the U.S. has been building around the Philippines, Japan, and South Korea. Additionally, they activated new radars and air defense batteries on the artificial islands in the South China Sea, but this is a mistake, because these moves are reactive, not proactive. The U.S. is setting the game. China is just trying to respond. And those aircraft carriers and artificial islands have now become perfect targets for the massive U.S. fleet and B-2s. What about Moscow? Putin's response is much more tragicomic. Russia's eastern front is so weak against nuclear-capable aircraft in Guam and missiles launched from Australia that Putin was forced to go on the defensive. The Russian Navy has deployed new coastal defense missile systems in Primorsky Krai, which borders the Sea of Japan. It has been reported that Bastion-type systems have been reactivated. Let's pause and analyze this. Vladimir Putin, the leader who presents himself to the world as a great strategist and who attacked Ukraine, is now forced to deploy defense missiles on his own Far East coast due to U.S. pressure. This confirms how serious Russia's capacity gap is in its Far East defense. With all of Putin's resources tied up in Ukraine, his Pacific home has been left vulnerable to plunder. Without firing a single bullet, the U.S. is confining Putin to his most valuable port through a mere show of force. And now we must turn to North Korea. Following the U.S. deployment of Typhon and submarines, the Pyongyang regime conducted 3 separate medium-range ballistic missile tests by the summer of 2025. This was seen not as a military response, but as an outburst of anger. These missiles offer no response to the U.S. strategy. It's just a cry of, "Look at me too." And this means wasting already scarce resources. All these details actually reveal how fake the so-called unlimited alliance between the 3 countries is, as this crisis has shown. When the U.S. put pressure on all 3, they couldn't form a united front. Putin isn't sending his Pacific fleet to help China. On the contrary, he's keeping it in port to protect it. China isn't helping Russia. It's focused entirely on Taiwan and its own coastline. Each is trying to fend for itself. The U.S.'s strategic pressure has cracked this so-called authoritarian axis before it could even unite. Throughout history, geopolitical power projections have been shaped on the continents, in the depths of the seas, and in the skies. But the steps the U.S. has taken toward the Pacific in 2025 are a direct intervention in the post-Cold War security architecture. The process, which began with the firing of SM-6 missiles on Allied soil, was completed with nuclear-capable bombers and an invisible submarine fleet. These moves signal a transformation in Washington's strategic doctrine. Deterrence is now measured not only by the size of deployed forces, but also by their mobility, versatility, and technological integration. For China, this marks the beginning of an era in which its mainland could be directly targeted. Building artificial islands in the South China Sea is no longer sufficient for deterrence. The situation is even more complicated for Russia. Putin's 21st-century imperial dreams are not only mired in the mud of Ukraine, they are now drowning in the deep waters of the Pacific. Every missile spent on Ukraine has weakened its defenses in Vladivostok, and its own admirals, forced to hide in their ports, know this reality all too well. For North Korea, this scenario is a potential source of panic in terms of regime stability. Moreover, the U.S. is not alone in this war. Australia hosting the Typhoon test is critical. Japan updating its air defense systems is equally important. We should also mention South Korea increasing intelligence sharing and the Philippines allocating new bases. All of this shows that the U.S. is not only increasing its own presence in the Pacific, but also simultaneously boosting the war readiness of its allies. This is an alliance network that China, Russia, and North Korea cannot break. Therefore, 2025 appears to be a turning point when Washington will shift gears in its Pacific doctrine. Now, the real question for countries in the region is this: is this new order delaying a conflict, or is it laying the groundwork for an inevitable showdown? The U.S.'s actions leave the answer to this question uncertain, because a strong deterrent also carries the greatest potential for provocation. But what is certain is that the Pacific is no longer just a trade route. The Pacific is now the new geopolitical pulse point of the century. And as the United States enters this race, it has declared the following: everyone will see who the leader is in the Pacific, and that the region's security cannot be considered separately from the U.S. So what do you think about this? Is the U.S.'s 3-tiered encirclement enough to stop China, Russia, and North Korea? We look forward to your comments. Thank you for watching.